It's Tuesday, March 28th, 2017. As I start recording this, it is 4:20 Pacific Standard Time, and this is 3000 NFL Mock Draft with your hosts, Kenneth Arthur and Rob Staten, me of fieldgoals.com, Rob Staten of SeahawksDraftBlock.com, where we get together and we talk about the draft every week and the Seahawks every week. Right now, we're in the gut of free agency, meaning that we're just about to be passed through to the colon of free agency, where we get the leftovers. And what we got coming up next, of course, is we've gone through the combine. More pro days are going down, interviews as teams begin to do their due diligence for the 2017 NFL draft, which is, I believe, 30 days out at this point, and the Seahawks are at pick 26. We will talk about what the Seahawks could do, some trade down scenarios, some of the other prospects that are being bandied about. Plus, I posted a mock draft today on sportsonearth.com, my first, perhaps only mock draft of the year, where I have the Seahawks getting Kevin King, the cornerback out of Washington. Nothing new there. It's been mocked by Rob back in January. It was just mocked by Mel Kiper for ESPN. But there's a lot of possibilities, and we'll go over why that means that I believe the Seahawks will be trading down once again, perhaps with the Cleveland Browns, who sit at pick 33, the top of the second round, and have a lot of picks with which to deal. And it could be beneficial contract-wise for both the Browns and the Seahawks to swap from the first round to the second round. But we will start out with Seahawks news. I guess it's the thing that people talk about the most, I think, in the offseason for the Seahawks, especially right now. John Schneider saying at the owner meetings that Adoree Jackson, the guard that they signed in the offseason, will start out at right guard, meaning that Germain Ifedi could indeed be moving to right tackle. Rob, what did you think of the Adoree Jackson signing, and what do you think about the possibilities of Ifedi going back and trying his things out at right tackle once again this year?
Well, I think it's important to note that the Seahawks kind of they say these things and then they try certain things. They're probably the most flexible team in the NFL when it comes to who's going to play where. When they drafted Germain Ifedi, the first thing they said was that he's going to be a right tackle, and then the next day they said he's going to be a right guard. You sort of see these guys. Mark Lewinsky was playing right guard, then he played left guard. Justin Britt's played 3 different positions. Gary Gilliam was supposed to be the left tackle last season, ended up staying at right tackle. So it's all very fluid. And I noticed that some of the reaction seems to be, well, Adoree Jackson could play right guard, therefore Germain Ifedi is going to go and play right tackle. I mean, that might happen. It's a possibility. But what also might happen is Adoree Jackson might not win the job, and Germain Ifedi might stay at right guard, or they might draft somebody to play right tackle. It seems to be a very fluid situation. I think what the Seahawks are going to do this year, ultimately, when they go into camp, and we can sit and we can project what the starting O-line is going to be, but I think what they're going to do is they're going to try players at different spots. Probably look at Luke Jokel at left tackle, look at him at left guard, give George Fant a chance to take a step forward this year. And at the end of the day, they're going to come out with the 5 best guys. And it could be something completely unexpected that we couldn't project now. It could be the most predictable 5 guys that you could imagine. I think the only safe, sound bet you can make at this point is that Justin Britt's going to be the centre. I think the other 4 positions are completely wide open. We could see players drafted as well to compete for different positions. So I think it's a very fluid situation, and we're a long way from finding out who is going to start where for Seattle.
Well, speaking of, who could get drafted, it was only a year ago. The Seahawks have 3 third-round picks this year with 2 comp picks, and certainly that can be an area where they look for a guard tackle. But a year ago, they had 3 third-round picks, and they selected C.J. Prosise, who has suffered through multiple injuries a lot already in his young career. Nick Vannett, who did nothing as a rookie at tight end and certainly didn't make them comfortable enough to move on from Luke Wilson. And Reese Adiyambo, who you didn't mention at all for good reason, and that they're not mentioning that much, and didn't get much play throughout the season and didn't really seem to threaten at guard or tackle. How would you grade the Seahawks 2016 third-round picks a year later? How would you? Obviously, they could have very bright futures, and I would hope that they do. But given that we're a year out from their last time that they took 3 third-round picks, what kind of grade would you place on that round for the Seahawks?
Well, I guess you just have to say that they've all got potential. The potential is there to be impact players. CJ Prosise showed that he has got an immense amount of talent. I think he needs to get physically stronger and needs to adjust his body to be capable of taking the kind of punishment he's going to get at this level to be a consistent player, because there's no good having him for 4 to 8 games a season. He's going to need to be physically able to play 16 and more. So that's one thing. I mean, he's looked really sharp and good, and I know the team hope for a lot from him. Nick Vannett we saw nothing of, so it's impossible to really judge how good or bad he is. He essentially got a redshirt season, but in year 2, you can kind of understand a redshirt season in your rookie year, especially when you've got Jimmy Graham and Luke Wilson on the roster, and Brandon Williams who they had. It wasn't totally unexpected, but you want to see him contributing this year, whether that's as a blocker or as a special teamer or as a pass catcher. You want to see him doing something. You want to see him take steps forward. As for Reese Odhiambo, they took a shot on him because he was injured. He didn't do a combine workout, didn't do much at his pro day, and what he did, he was clearly still recovering from his injury. They saw something in him. They probably got some intel from Chris Peterson, who coached him at Boise State. There seems to be a good relationship between the University of Washington and the Seahawks, and in particular Peterson and Pete Carroll. So maybe they got some intel there. Tom Cable had a look at him, liked what he saw, and yet he just, it's strange really that unless he was never really 100% last year, never 100% recovered from his injuries, how someone like George Fant could win the job at left tackle, if you want to say win, win in quotation marks, but could take the job at left tackle and play there the whole year virtually unchallenged. And Reese Odhiambo never really got into the equation, and that has to be a little bit worrying because he's a 3rd round pick. You'd think they'd want to push him forward. You'd want to see him competing to eventually be there at left tackle. And yeah, you're right. I didn't mention him a few moments ago, and it's hard to sort of see how he fits into this thing, because you imagine it's either going to be Fant or Jokel at left tackle. It could be Glowinski at left guard or Luke Jokel. Is Odhiambo going to, if they consider Glowinski moving him back to the right side to compete with Ibushi and Ifedi, then does that mean Odhiambo comes into contention at left tackle, left guard? How does he fit into the whole thing here? So hard to judge him again, though, because he hasn't played that much. I'm loath to say after one season that these were bad picks. And off the top of my head, the Seahawks didn't pass on anybody in the late 3rd round that you said with hindsight they really should have gone them. So, hopefully, I know that they're kind of banking on Ifedi, Reed, Prosise, Vannett, and Odhiambo having an impact and sort of being a great draft class for them. The odds will suggest that at least 1 or 2 of those guys are not going to work out. But if they can get something from Ifedi and Reed and at least one of the 3rd round picks, then that will probably go down as a decent draft class for Seattle.
Yeah, and just quoting John Schneider from the Seattle Times.com, just throwing out some quotes that John Schneider said about Ifedi and the other offensive linemen. As far as Ibushi, just all these different reports people throw at you, he was really efficient, and so he's just stood out. With all the analytics stuff we do, it's kind of about asking more questions and going back to the film, and that's what we did with him, and just talking to a bunch of people that he has been with led us to a really good place with him. And in terms of Ifedi saying that he was, quote, rehabbing his ankle, and Ifedi was doing great getting used to guard before he had that high ankle right before our opener. Ifedi was kind of learning the program. When he was on, and when he was off, he knows what he needs to work on at this point. As far as Luke Jokel, who they gave an $8 million contract to and is rehabbing from ACL and MCL injuries for last October, quote, we feel he can play left tackle. Actually, in our opinion, he played a little bit better at guard last year, so he's got the ability to play both spots, so there's utility value there. He's got almost a veteran presence about him, played a lot of football. In terms of George Fant, I guess when you think about George, he knows he's got a long ways to go, but it's pretty incredible what he did. Basketball player lining up. Reese came in, got hurt right away, so he was kind of behind the eight ball. And Joey Hunt went in there and played really well for us when he had to. Really excited about Reese, too. Made a lot of progress this offseason. It's still a short offseason, so, we'll see what happens in the future, but it sounds like Jokel, they're expecting to play left tackle or left guard. It sounds like maybe they're leaning towards him being better at guard, which could open the door for George Fant, and if that means that Afidi is at the right tackle and Adiambo and Abushi playing a right guard, just a lot of mishmash and stuff going on there. Do you see anything on day one or day two of the draft that could fall the Seahawks' way in terms of the offensive line that could help maybe clear these things up? A player of a certain caliber that you think might be able to come in and compete right away at left tackle or at right guard?
I mean, yeah, there are options. I mean, it's well advertised that it's not the greatest defensive line draft, but Garrett Bowles, I think, is a terrific player. I mean, for me, he's probably going to go in the top 15. I've seen other projections like Emil Kuiper's mock draft. He didn't even have him in the first round. Not sure whether that was a mistake or whether it was intended, whether Mel's heard something there, but it'd be interesting to hear his thoughts, maybe in one of his podcasts, as to why Bowles wasn't in his latest mock draft. The age thing, I know people keep coming back to that, but at the same time, you could still get a 7-year career out of him potentially, and that's more than most first-round picks. So I think that Bowles is going to go quite early, but if he lasted to sort of number 26, then he would have to be an option there to play left or right tackle. I think that Forrest Lamp, is the most explosive offensive lineman in this draft class. Proven, at least among the guys at the combine. I think that he would be an option as well, and someone that they could look at as potentially working at guard or even center. Because Justin Britt's out of contract at the end of the season, and having a hedge for him if they don't want to pay him $8 to $10 million or whatever he's going to get on the open market, might not be the worst thing in the world. It is another interior guy though. They're pretty good there, so they would have to love Lamp, to coin that tired phrase. If he does fall to 26, then he has to be someone that they consider. I'm not convinced on the whole Ryan Ranchik thing. I was never really into him as much as I was Garrett Bowles. And I think that his injury history will maybe just be a bit of a difference maker there. And I think Cam Robinson is too much of kind of what they've had in the past, really. A tackle who has to move inside to guard. And, if they're going to go down that road again, and they've kind of got that guy. They've been there and they've done that with Carpenter. They've had to do it with Britt. They've had to do it with Jermaine Ifedi. I'm not convinced they're going to go down that road again. As for, options beyond the first round, keep an eye on Taylor Moton, who's from Western Michigan. He's 6'5", well-sized, sort of 315, 320 pounds. Really good run blocker. I can imagine them looking at him as a potential right tackle option. It will be. I'm not sure if Roderick Johnson worked out at the Florida State Pro Day today, but if he did, it'd be interesting to see his numbers. And I think that Adam Bisnovotti, just because he has the similar style of play to Ricky Wagner and is going to be a lot cheaper, I think that teams will look at him as a prospective right tackle, and he's got the wrestling background that the Seahawks like, so maybe he's somebody they would look at. Jermaine Illumina has had a good off season and maybe could be an option too. I know people liked the performance of Avian Collins until he got injured, the TCU player. He got injured at the combine. And the other guy that I really like is Isaac Arciata, just because I think that he and Garrett Bowles were probably the most physical players that I watched on in the college season last year. The way that they really dominated that left-hand side of the offensive line. Arciata's a mature, punishing, physical, tough, explosive offensive lineman. And if they are looking at moving Ifedi to right tackle and creating competition at both guard spots, then, drafting Isaac Asiata and having him compete at left guard, center, and right guard. And he would be another hedge for Justin Britt as well. Could be a really attractive option for them, potentially round 2, maybe round 3. The other name, Nico Siragusa, was one of the few explosive testers at the combine. He could be an option as well.
If the Seahawks want to go in that route where they're not going to get someone in the first round that's really going to have an impact at the offensive line, and they want to be able to have more options later on, certainly a trade down scenario would seem very possible, if not probable. The Seahawks traded down in 2012, in 2014, and in 2016, and then in 2013 and 2015, they traded their first-round picks for Percy Harvin and Jimmy Graham, respectively. So they're not keen on staying where they are in the draft, and usually it's about trading down or using the pick to get a player of a certain value. I think definitely when you look at the draft, the way that it sets up right now, the players that could be available at 26, there's going to be at least, it feels like 10 to 12 who, Seahawks fans would have want for one reason or another. I think, Rob, you've written a lot of really good pieces on why a certain player would be perfect for the Seahawks in the first round. And I think that's a good thing that there's so many varied ones, whether it's Obi Melifonwu, Kevin King, Adoree Jackson, or, so many guys. We could go on for at least, another 10, Forrest Lamp. And if someone like Garrett Bowles does fall, past into the 20s or something like that, then maybe that's a place where they move up or stay where they are. Someone that you think could be a real legit top tier left tackle, then that would be something to address. But trading down certainly seems like a very viable scenario, especially if you look at the Seahawks. If they're trying to save a little bit of money, whether it's whether it's a few $100,000 or $1 million or something like that, there's a little bit more flexibility when you get down into the second round. I wrote an article this week on field goals about why I thought the Seahawks would trade down, or why things setting up for a probability of trading down. And we had a really good comment on that from Red Hawk 87, who I asked for permission to repost his comment, which was using the Jimmy Johnson trade value chart, which, for all intents and purpose, if you can call it outdated, you might as well call it sort of made up from the beginning. But it does, I still think that it holds value in the sense that it gives you a baseline with which to work. And a lot of times when you do look at the trades that are made, the point systems do kind of line up in many of those cases. So with the Seahawks at pick 26, they could potentially trade down with the Cleveland Browns, who are at pick 33, and they'll pick up the first pick in the second round, plus 3 fourth-round picks, pick 108, 175, and 181. The Seahawks don't have a fourth-round pick because they traded it last year to the Patriots so that they could draft Quentin Jefferson in the 5th round. And they don't have a 5th-round pick because of the punishment by the league for practice rules violations. So to pick up 3 extra 4th-round picks would be huge. And for the Seahawks moving down 7 spots, whether or not that would cost them someone that they really like, it seems unlikely to me that it would cost them someone that they couldn't do without, given that there are an abundance of players that seem to be available at pick 26. Some of the other scenarios that could happen with this pick value chart would be trading down with the Steelers, who are at 30th, and maybe picking up pick 105 instead. Now, the reason that would be, you're not getting those 2 other 4th-round picks from the Browns because that's 3 picks higher than the pick from the Browns. But I think that's not enough of a gap to not have those extra 4th-round picks. They could trade down with the 49ers, though I think that it's unlikely that they would give the 49ers a chance to draft a quarterback, which is probably what 49ers would be trading up for. They could trade down with the Packers, who surprisingly I've found out John Schneider has never traded with the Packers. There's about 8 teams that the Seahawks have not traded with since 2010, the Packers being one of them. They did recently make a trade with the Bears, so they could trade down from 26 to 36 and pick up another 2nd or high 3rd-round pick from the Bears, and in return give them their 4th-round pick. So there's some really good trade scenarios there. What do you think are the odds are of the Seahawks trading down given the draft board, and how much would you love or not really care for that deal with the Browns where you pick up 3 extra 4th-round picks?
Well, you could look at it 2 ways. I mean, the draft is certainly deep enough to justify moving down, because I think that the player that will ultimately go probably at 21 to Detroit is going to be of a similar value to the guy who goes at maybe even, let's say, 46 to Baltimore, 47 to Indianapolis. I think that the value from maybe even earlier than that, maybe from like about 15 to 16 all the way through to 50, is going to be pretty similar. It's a very deep draft class, but it doesn't have the, aside from maybe sort of 3 or 4 different players, it doesn't have, a very great heavy top end. So you're not going to get, there aren't many legitimate top 10 picks in this draft class. There's probably sort of 4 or 5 who are going to go in the top 10 who would otherwise not go that early. But it's very deep. So moving down makes sense to that extent, depending on who is there at 26. I mean, this is the other thing, is that, you can move down and get a player who's graded similar to the guy you're going to take at 26, but you might just have a feeling about the guy at 26 that you just don't want to miss out on them. So you can look at it 2 ways. I think that with the Seahawks have kind of shaped themselves as well to go defensive back very early in this draft. So they've added linebackers in free agency. They've added offensive linemen. I think it's pointing towards cornerback. And because of the great depth at cornerback and maybe more guys are going to go in the second round than the first round, then moving to the top of the second round again also makes sense. You might be able to get the guy you were going to take at 26 anyway, but if not, there's going to be sort of 2 or 3 other guys that you would consider dropping into the 30s for. So, yeah, they're the arguments for moving down. I think that the argument against it is probably that, how much do you actually going to get from 3? I don't think you would get 3 fourth-round pick, and the trade value chart might suggest that. But for example, I think the Seahawks got like a 4th-round pick when they moved from around 25 to 32, maybe for when they were 32 and they moved down into the second round. When Minnesota traded up for Teddy Bridgewater, so I think they got a 4th-round pick and they got 1 3rd-round pick, late 3rd-round pick, for moving from 26 to 31 last year. When they traded with the Broncos for Paxton Lynch. So you're probably going to look at maybe 1 or 2 picks that you're going to get for that. And for me, as good as this draft class is, I think there is going to be a drop-off in the 4th round. So I think that it's great to have 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. I think that is where the real quality is going to be. I think that the 4th or 5th round, you are going to see a drop-off, though. So it might be that at the late 4th round, you're suddenly looking at players that you really see as priority free. You might be sort of getting into the priority free agent sort of market at the end of round 4 and round 5. You might be looking at guys that, you don't think you're going to get in free agency, so you take them. Maybe you're shooting for upside, guys you can coach up. That might be the kind of players you're looking for. And I'm not sure that it's worth trading down and maybe getting a great player at 26 or someone that you're making sure you get the one you really want at 26. To try and manufacture the fact that you're not going to have 2 rounds of that pick. So you can kind of look at it 2 ways. If they trade down, I wouldn't be surprised. If they didn't trade down and didn't pick in the 4th or 5th round, it wouldn't concern me too much. I mean, this is unusual for the Seahawks to have 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. It's a very veritable treat in this draft class. So hopefully they will make the most of those picks and come away with 3 or 4 impact players, because it's certainly possible with the picks they've got.
I posted a mock draft over at sportsonearth.com. It was a post free agency mock draft, sort of going through the motions of, or going past once the teams had signed the players of need, and maybe their needs changed a little bit, and now we could take another look at the draft. It was my first time doing a mock, but this year it was my first time doing a mock. And actually, I did do one earlier, and we talked about it on this podcast, but I didn't put too much thought into that one. I put some more thought into this one. But before I get into any of those moves, I do want to just use that post-free agency thing to just sort of get into cornerbacks for a while, because, the Seahawks had need along the offensive line. They signed Luke Jokel and Jermaine Ode-Abushi, which is something. They had a need at running backs. They signed Eddie Lacy. They wanted to retain their own players, so they kept Luke Wilson. They put a tender on Gary Gilliam, and they have not re-signed yet, Tony McDaniel. They re-signed Deshaun Shedd, and they haven't re-signed Michael Morgan. So there's some things going on but at cornerback, it's still the same need. Shedd was re-signed, but will miss, at least you would think 10 games. Even if he comes back, we don't know at what level he'll come back. They re-signed Nico Thorpe. They've still got Jeremy Lane, but that need at cornerback is not a joke. It's like that's still going to be the biggest thing, which is why we talk about Kevin King and Gary and Conley, and we can also talk about the safeties and the stuff like that. But in terms of cornerbacks, there seems to be we've been talking about how it's one of the best classes and everything like that. Rob, you've been talking a lot about cornerbacks on SeahawksDraftBlog.com this week, with articles like, would the Seahawks draft back-to-back cornerbacks? What does arm length matter in the slot? And talking a lot about Adoree Jackson and some of that kind of stuff. So how would you sort of look at it now with the Seahawks at 26 as opposed to, their pick at 58, their picks in the 3rd round? Where are your thoughts? If you could sum up your thoughts on that stuff for the podcast, so people can check it out deeper on SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Where are your thoughts right now on the Seahawks need to address cornerback in this draft? What would be the best ways for them to attack that need at cornerback, and what are some of the scenarios you see playing out?
Well, I think it's a fascinating thing to look at because we know that the Seahawks haven't drafted a cornerback before the fourth round before, and yet here I am, sort of pontificating on whether or not they're going to do it twice. Take one in round one and run in round two, which would be a complete departure from what they've done in the past. And yet, the major strength in this draft class is defensive back. In particular, cornerback, and some great safeties as well. For the first time in a long time, the production line at corner, and I know that. John Schneider has been talking up Pierre Desir today, and they do like the depth, and we signed Nico Thorpe, but this seems to be, if you are going to sort of try and lay some foundations, not just for the future, but also give that defense a bit of a jolt as well, then cornerback and safety seem to be the two positions you can really attack in this draft class. So I've been thinking a lot about it, and it's entirely possible the Seahawks will take an outside cornerback. With King and everything that he brings to the table, there are other guys as well who might be available, such as Gareon Conley, Tre'Davious White, one or two others too. Cordia Tankersley, maybe an option in round two as well, because and the player that the more I watched him, I think it was about 10 days ago that I was watching him, and more and more I liked what I was seeing with him because he's physical when he needs to be. I think his anticipation of routes is really good. He undercuts routes so well. It's something that you don't see a lot from sort of college cornerbacks, sort of knowing to get in position to make a play. He does that very well. His hand use is excellent. It's one of the things that Gareon Conley struggles with. It's a really underrated feature. There's one thing that if you ever watch some cornerbacks, it's something to keep an eye on when you're watching them in the college game, is to see how they use their hands, because you see a lot of free releases with Gareon Conley. And if you are letting a receiver in the NFL get a free release and then basically get the chance to make his cut or his break once he's getting into his route and you've not touched him, he's going to win 10 out of 10 times, because you need to have a feel for where the route's going. You need to sort of have an initial press, try and reroute them. You need to have a jam. You need to sort of just be almost in contact with them. You don't have to be holding them and giving the flag, but you have to be in contact with them to get a feel for where they're going to move, what they're going to do, so you can get an idea of where they're going to go. And if you don't have that, you're going to get beat. And Gareon Conley is going to have to learn this technique when he gets to the next level, because he just doesn't do it in college. Whereas Cordia Tankersley really does do that. So he was one player that I think that they might really like, because he's got that ability to do it. He reminds me of Byron Maxwell. He went to Clemson like Maxwell did. So he could be someone they really look at. But in the first round, I kind of started to think, we've seen mock drafts recently, and Kevin King is off the board. So, for example, Tony Pauline put his 2-round mock draft out this week, and he had Kevin King going at number 14 to Philadelphia. I think Mel Kiper had him to Seattle, but I'm sure I've seen another one. It's completely slipped my mind which one it was. Who had him going to, I think, Oakland at 24, or maybe a little bit earlier than that. Because Kevin King is such a tremendous athlete, a rare freak of nature athlete with the right attitude, the willingness to study tape, everything that you want in a prospect at cornerback, there's every chance he won't be there at 26. He could be, and he could be the pick, but he might not be there. And in a scenario where he's not there, and maybe Obi Melifonwu's not there, and maybe Gareon Conley's not there, what are they going to look for here? And it got me to thinking, Kenny, and maybe you can chime in on this and let me know what you think about this. But one of the things they might actually try to do is improve their play at slot cornerback. Now, Jeremy Lane played 71% of the snaps. He was basically a regular starter. He was a starting player last year. And his play wasn't that good. A few people complained about the way that Jeremy Lane played. And when Pete Carroll was asked at the end of the year what he thought of Jeremy Lane, he was kind of lukewarm in his assessment. And when Carroll's lukewarm about somebody, really it's telling. It means that he wasn't happy with the way that he played, because Carroll is such a positive guy. So replacing Lane might be the priority. They might feel like we can get an outside cornerback, whether it's in the draft, whether it's Pierre Desir, whether it's putting Jeremy Lane outside, whether it's Nico Thorpe, whatever. They started Deshaun Shed there last year. They might feel they can get somebody to play outside corner. What they might feel like they really need is a thoroughly dynamic slot receiver, somebody who can work the slot. And maybe that's a safety who's a great athlete like Melifonwu, can play as a big nickel, or maybe it's a cornerback who is really athletic, who can be totally dynamic and a playmaker inside of the slot. And that's why I started thinking about Adoree Jackson. And very briefly on Adoree Jackson, the thing that stands out to me, Kenny, and I've watched more than 10 of his games in the last 2 days. The thing that stands out to me to him is he is incredibly sudden. He is exactly the type of athlete that Pete Carroll adores. His coverage ability just went through the roof in 2016 compared to what it was before. He looks like a cornerback instead of a guy who plays 3 different positions in 2016. He had as many pass breakups as Kevin King did, who was getting targeted a lot more than Adoree Jackson was in college, because teams were avoiding Sidney Jones, and his pass breakups were very similar to Cordrea Tankersley and Tre'Davious White. He had, I think, 4 or 5 interceptions. He had 3 or 4, I think, 4 kick returns for touchdowns. I mean, he's got the special teams impact as well there. He can play offense. And I just looked at this guy, and the thought struck me that he's Percy Harvin. That's what he is. He's Percy Harvin who plays defense. That's the perfect way to sum him up. He's got almost the exact same speed as Percy Harvin. He's got the exact same frame. He's got the exact same toughness despite being a smaller player. He has got the same suddenness and explosiveness and his kick return ability. I mean, Adoree Jackson might be the best kick returner to enter the league in a generation. He is an unreal kick return specialist. And what are the Seahawks so keen on? Playmaking on special teams. They might not have Tyler Lockett doing that at the start of the year. They scrambled around trying to find somebody to replace Tyler Lockett when he got injured. Now you've got Tyler Lockett and Adoree Jackson who can do that. He's a game changer as a special teamer. And I can imagine the Seahawks even saying, he's going to be our 70% snap slot cornerback. And we're going to have a package for him on offense as well. We're going to throw him the ball. We're going to give it him they love wide receiver bubble screens. That's how he'll take one to the house from 70 yards. I mean, there is just something about Adoree Jackson. And I know he's not big, and I know he's not long. He's got 31.5-inch arms instead of 32. But his personality is incredibly Seahawky. He's just bubbly and jumps off you can just see he's energized, enjoying himself, enjoys the game. He is tough. There was 3 plays I watched watching these 10 games turn out. There was one game when USC got hammered by Alabama, 31 points to 3. The score was on the scoreboard, and the Alabama running back breaks through, and he's running for Pater. He's running for a touchdown. There is nobody who's going to stop him. And even though it was 31-3, Adoree Jackson chases him down from behind. From 60 yards, he starts sprinting, and Adoree Jackson brings him down at like the 2-yard line. He could have given up on that and just gone, oh, God, another touchdown. He did not give up on that play. He sprinted and caught up with the guy and made the tackle. And you see that. I saw that 3 times where he didn't give up on a lost cause and made a touchdown-saving tackle. He has got so many things that scream Seahawks at you. The only thing he hasn't got is size and length. But if they want to improve that slot cornerback position, if they want a game changer on special teams, if they want somebody who you can toss the ball, 5 times a game, and on offense as well, Adoree Jackson could be someone they really, really like. Doesn't mean they're definitely going to take him. They could go O-line, they could go outside corner, but there's just something about Adoree Jackson which we should keep him in mind, because he could definitely be an option for the Seahawks.
Well, I think, you have to consider nickel as a base defense in the NFL right now. And, typically we have historically always listed out the 11 starters on defense to include 3 linebackers or 4 defensive linemen. But in general, I think now you have to talk about it as 5 defensive backs as the regular base defense. So, yeah, it's a starter. And if you're weak there, we've seen how, a weakness in the slot. I mean, the New England Patriots mostly take advantage of their abilities to do things in the slot with, and that's a big thing. They've just added Brandon Cooks, so that's sort of the offense that you have to game plan for. Whether if it's going to be a slot tight end like Rob Gronkowski or Greg Olsen or something like that you're going to face in whether in the NFC or in the Super Bowl or something like that. I think that's where you have those fast, more athletic coverage linebackers like KJ Wright. And if it's going to be, if you're facing off against Brandon Cooks, or if you're in the NFC West, you're talking about slot receivers like Tavon Austin, Larry Fitzgerald, and maybe Pierre Garçon. You could play in there, but it's like, I think that's a lot of the times now where it's like, if you have a Richard Sherman, a team will say, where can we get the most out of are receiving threats inside rather than outside. Richard Sherman may also track a player and stuff like that, but I definitely can see the value in adding a slot cornerback just in the same way that, Doug Baldwin is the best slot receiver in the NFL, and it has a huge impact on Russell Wilson's game. So that's one of those things where you have to sort of game plan for what teams are taking advantage of. And I think it's clear that if Adoree Jackson, because it's like Tyrann Mathieu and Chris Harris are essentially slot cornerbacks. And so if you have someone like that, it's going to have a huge impact on your defense. And I think secondary is the second most important thing in football right now. It's quarterbacks and the ability to stop the quarterback. So secondary is certainly something that Seahawks, you don't have to just address it from the outside, like you said. What would be your next step with Jeremy Lane if the Seahawks did draft Adoree Jackson or a player of the like? Is he now like, well, he's back in the competition outside, or what's your move then with Jeremy Lane?
I think that's what it has to be. If you draft someone in the first round who's going to be a slot corner, then you have to sort of almost anoint them. I mean, you want them to compete for the job, but I think almost certainly it would move towards them starting. And I think that Lane moves outside in that scenario. But the thing about Jeremy Lane is that his play did not warrant the investment the Seahawks put in him last year. And while he's untouchable this year because of his contract, I think in a year's time, they can cut him and save $5 million. And when you have got a situation where you're going to have to make a decision on Justin Britt between now and then, and you have to make a decision on Jimmy Graham, and you have to make a decision on Cam Chancellor, and a year later, you've got Sherman and Earl Thomas and KJ Wright and Cliff Averill out of contract. You might sort of think, look, this is one of the moves we're going to make. We're going to cut Jeremy Lane in a year, and Adoree Jackson's going to be our cheapest starter there for a few years. And that's something they're going to have to consider doing, I think. And you're right. I mean, the Seahawks played. I know that the Seahawks were a 4-3 under team, and they had a strong side linebacker on the roster, Mike Morgan. But they had Jeremy Lane on the field for 71% of the snaps last year. He was, I think that, funny enough, the game that he played the least number of snaps was against New England, in New England. But apart from that, he was virtually like a 80-90% snap guy for a lot of the year. It's a starting role. The Seahawks basically played a 4-2-5 last year with their two linebackers inside and the nickel corner on the field. So, it becomes a very, very important role. And that's just something about Adoree Jackson that, like I say, he's just such an incredible athlete. You watch the sort of track and field events that he does, that he did at USC, and he was a terrific long jumper. I think he tried to get to the Olympics last year as a long jumper. He sprints the 100 meters, and, you just sort of see the incredible athlete that he is. And that while he didn't go to the combine and do what Obi Melifonwu did, that's, it's not always translatable in that way. And Jackson, to me, is somebody that we have to take seriously. He would be different, but, this is the kind of thing. And the other one final point on this, I think that it's going to take a long time for any young outside cornerback to learn Seattle's technique. It's kind of naive to think that someone's going to come in here even as a first round pick and be able to play outside corner for the Seahawks in week one, because this technique that they teach, it's not easy to pick up, as Kerry Williams showed us. And a lot of the guys that they start have been in the system for a year or two. So it could be that Jeremy Lane plays outside of Pierre Desir, who's at least been in the system for a while, or Nico Thorpe plays there. That could be the kind of player that ends up starting at outside cornerback. Even if they take another outside cornerback later on, maybe in round 2, like Cordae Tankersley. But I think working in the slot, it's a lot easier. You're not playing a technique per se, playing in the slot corner. You're really just sort of matching one-on-one against either a Julian Edelman or one of the receivers they move inside, or maybe even a tight end, and you're saying, just run and cover that guy. And I think that might be one of the reasons why they might be more comfortable taking a slot corner in the first round rather than an outside cornerback. So that's maybe another reason why they might do this.
One of the big stories of the day today with in regards to the draft was Teez Tabor, the Florida cornerback, running a 4.75 in his 40. How far do you see Tabor falling down? How well did you really rate him before this pro day, and what do you think that does to him now?
Well, I put together an unpublished sort of mock draft that I've been kind of like sitting on for a while because I don't just want to put one out every week. I want them to actually mean something. So, and I had him down at 45 to Arizona, and I think that he may fall further than that. The thing about Tees is that it's not totally unexpected. This, I think that you kind of got to know where to look, and one of the things is that a lot of the players that are in this draft class did the Nike Spark Combine in 2013. So a lot of the names that are in this draft class did essentially a mini combine back then, and all of the data was collected and put together. You can find it. So the likes of Cam Robinson and Teez Tabor and Quincy Wilson and people like that all took part in this event. Deshaun Watson was there. Lots of them play. And Teez Tabor ran a late 4.6, and so did Quincy Wilson. And that kind of stood out. You know, people like Adoree Jackson ran exactly what they ran at the combine. They ran at this Nike Spark Combine. Whereas Quincy Wilson and Teez Tabor ran, 4.6s at the combine and at the Spark Combine. And then Quincy Wilson actually improved as his time when he went to the NFL Combine. So you could see that maybe he's worked on his speed, his athleticism, he's become a better athlete during his time at Florida. Whereas Teez Tabor is kind of just what he is, what he was in 2013. Over the course of like the last 4 years, his athleticism hasn't really changed. So teams are going to have to look at this guy and say, well, okay, he's kind of running a bit like Joe Hayden did, and Joe Hayden had a good career. So do we trust the tape and think, yep, okay, it's another slow Florida cornerback who might actually be better than the time suggests? Or are they going to look at this and say, you know what, in a deep cornerback class, I can draft a guy who I like as good as him that I graded in the same way, and he ran a 4.4, and this guy's running a 4.6 or a 4.7. And that's going to be a problem for Teez Tabor. He might have been able to get away with it in a different draft class, but with so many great cornerbacks available this year, I think it's going to push him behind one or two. So I know that a lot of people like Tom McShay about 2 or 3 weeks ago were saying, I really like Teez Tabor. I think he's going to go in the top 20 and then he's going to be a first-round pick. And then was sort of saying, I'm disappointed because he didn't do well at the combine and I don't know where he's going to go now. Realistically, he's gone from being someone who could go in the first round. He's now falling behind, obviously, players like Conley and King. And I think Chidobe Awuzie as well, I think is ahead of him. Adoree Jackson is ahead of him. I think Tre'Davious White and Quincy Wilson are going to end up ahead of him. And, I think Corey Tankersley might end up ahead of him as well. Maybe people like Cam Sutton, and it's getting so bad for him that maybe even the injured players like Sidney Jones and Fabian Moreau will be considered ahead of him as well. So that might push him towards sort of that late second round. But the tape on him is not too bad. So I think that the teams will still look at him and think there's a player to be worked with there. Maybe we can coach him up to be a little faster, or maybe in a certain scheme like Seattle's, for example, it won't matter as much. So someone might actually get some value from Jalen, or now as he's known, Teez Tabor.
Another player, not a day one or day two pick, but a player who has gone from undrafted free agent to somewhere perhaps on day three, is Brandon Wilson out of Houston, a cornerback at Houston. Wilson is 5'10", 198, but at his pro day, he ran a 4.36. He did 24 reps on the bench, had a 41-inch vertical and an 11.1 broad jump. If he was a cornerback, his vertical jump and bench press would have been first for all cornerbacks. His broad jump would have been second. And his 40 time would have been third. But even as a running back, those are still elite numbers. The Seahawks worked Brandon Wilson out, but they worked him out at running back. And, they like versatile players. They're not afraid to turn players around and try different positions if that's what they're athletically inclined to do, especially if Wilson was not a good cornerback. I mean, they've tried this with Nate Robinson, the former basketball player. They've moved other players, of course, from one position to the other. Any thoughts or anything that you know about Brandon Wilson? Any thoughts on whether or not they would go for the seventh round route on Brandon Wilson or be a high, undrafted free agent priority?
Well, I've not seen a great deal of his videos. There's not a great deal of information about him available on the internet. I think that he used to play. I'm led to believe he used to play running back, I think, and maybe the Seahawks want to sort of, they've seen what kind of an athlete he is, and it's entirely possible they think, sensational athlete, great speed, really explosive. but we maybe don't quite see him as a cornerback. So let's see, his old position was running back. Let's see if what he can do there. It might be that they think that he could be a potential kick return option for them, and some of the running back drills are kind of similar to the things you would do on a kick return. So a lot of quick, short, sharp change of direction, read and react type things. So they might be thinking, we can bring this guy in. He could be maybe a slot cornerback like Adoree Jackson, do some kick returns for us. And that in itself could lend it towards suggesting that maybe they're looking for a hedge here in case Adoree Jackson's not available to them. Who is someone who can play slot corner and can be a return man? And maybe this is the other thing they're thinking with him. Or maybe they just want a complete profile of the player that they think, we know what he can do at cornerback. We feel pretty comfortable with the grade we've given him there. But hey, look, this physical profile is really cool. Let's just see if we can add any information on his potential to be a running back too. So it certainly sounded like a tremendous workout the other day. The numbers that you just listed there, Kenny, are very impressive and very enticing. So I would imagine that he could be a player that might take a visit to the VMAC at some point. And that would really confirm that the Seahawks have some interest. And, when we're talking about trading down and getting more picks in the round 4, 5, 6, 7 region, this is the type of player that you would do that for. You're not going to probably not going to take him in the first 3 rounds. But if you do get picks in 4, 5, 6, 7, then, it's the type of player that maybe you take a flyer on day 3 and think he's got major potential. Let's see what we can do with him.
And another guy that had a really strong pro day was Jarrad Davis. His 38.5-inch vertical would have ranked first at the combine. His 10.8 broad jump would have tied TJ Watt. This for being the linebackers, Florida linebacker Jarrad Davis. I put him at 21 to the Lions in my mock draft. And, people on Twitter, at least one guy literally tried to roast me for it and said there's no way he's going to be a first-round pick, which we can get on this whole thing about mock drafts and people saying there's no way. There's no way in hell. That can't happen, man. Like, I don't even when I post my own mock drafts, I don't say this is for sure, because we're all just out here making our fun guesses. And it's so ridiculous to me when people read a mock draft and decide, or anything online, and decide, I better tell this guy that my opinion is different as his, but not only is my opinion different, but mine is a fact and his is false, So it's this whole dumb thing that people have a tendency to do. They, for me personally, if I'm out there and yeah, I mean, I got Garrett Bowles here at number 9 to the Bengals because, we've talked a lot about him on our podcast. But my buddy Rob seems to think he's really good. And I know for a fact that his combine numbers were one of the best ever for an offensive lineman. So I'm comfortable putting him there. And maybe, maybe Kuiper isn't, and he's got his own reasons, and that's fine. We're definitely not, going to butt heads on certain things. I think there's definitely the things that you read in mock drafts and you say, hey, I can't believe you did that. I mean, people would probably read mine where there is no Derek Barnett and say, I can't believe you did that. But I wouldn't say you're so stupid, just be oh, I have a difference of opinion on that. Just silly things like that. And so I had Jarrad Davis going 21st to the Lions before these pro day numbers. And I think the pro day numbers only solidify that Davis could be a great replacement for DeAndre Levy. I've gone on a tangent there, but I just wanted your thoughts on Jarrad Davis.
Well, I don't want to follow a league that doesn't think Jarrad Davis is not a first-round pick. I mean, the guy is just everything that I think makes the game of football great. And, the guy who challenged you on whether or not he's going to be in the first round needs to go and watch some games and needs to get on YouTube immediately, because Jarrad Davis is one of the best players in this draft. He has got everything. I mean, there was just absolutely no reason to doubt that he's going to go in the first round at this point. And if he doesn't, I will personally find that very surprising, because he's got the size. He's not a smaller linebacker. That's something that gets levied at him quite a lot. And he's not small. I mean, he tested as pretty much like every other, good linebacker in the NFL right now. He's of that size. He ran a 4.56, which is perfectly acceptable. It's not, Bobby Wagner, but it's around Luke Kuechly type of range. He had a vertical jump that, had he competed at the combine, would have been the best vertical jump of any linebacker. And he had a broad jump that would have been the best broad jump of any linebacker at the combine. So he's an explosive player. He is the most intense, physical joy to watch linebackers you will ever see. I mean, he just smashes people around, celebrates when he makes a good play. He's Ray Lewis. That's there's absolutely no need to shirk away from that kind of a comparison. That's the kind of guy he is. And then you listen to him speak in press conferences, and you just think teams are going to fall in love with this guy. He's going to leave the room, and they're going to want to draft him right there and then, because he does not. I think he is honest. He is intense. He's got this deep, rich passion for the game. I have absolutely no doubt that if he avoids kind of like niggling injuries, which admittedly he's had some of those in his college career, but if he avoids the injuries and he gets drafted by a good team, that he is going to be one of these stars on defense in the NFL over the next few years. That, there's with Luke Kuechly's unfortunate health situation and with one or two other linebackers, Navarro Bowman having injuries and stuff, there is an opening there for the next sort of 2 or 3 stud middle linebackers to come into the league. And Jarrad Davis for me is one of those. And I think that Detroit at 21, Kenny, is a very viable option for him. I think that 16 at Baltimore is a very viable option. I think as early as 13 to Arizona, he could go as early as that. No doubt at all that he could go in that kind of range. Indianapolis at 15 might look at him. Tennessee at 18 might look at him. And I think that probably his floor might be Oakland at 24. He's that good a player. It shouldn't have taken the pro day for people to wake up to how good this guy is. He is incredible. And there has to be a home, in my opinion, for him in the first round.
It feels similar to the way you talked about Keanu Neal a year ago, that you would say that Keanu Neal is going early in the draft, and people would say nobody else is saying that, and then he does go early, and then his first year with the Falcons is fantastic. Is there would you say that he's sort of your 2017 Keanu Neal?
Well, I think there's a few of those this year. I mean, we were talking about Hassan Reddick, and for a long time before, and then he kind of started to shoot up. And if we're talking about guys that people don't generally feel they're going to go in the first round who could, then yeah, I think it definitely could be someone like Jarrad Davis. Because it's kind of strange. I just wonder whether not competing at the combine has maybe sort of made people forget him. There seems to be the guys who didn't work out at the combine have almost gone anonymous, and now in the pro days they are giving themselves a bit of a boost here. But if there are 32 players in this draft better than Jarrad Davis, then I'll be shocked. And teams want guys like this. They want to be able to turn around and say, he's not only really athletic, he's not only got great tape, he's not only really productive and tough. I mean, like, they asked Derrick Henry on the NFL Network a year ago, who is the toughest player you faced? He plays in the SEC. He's played, a lot of great opponents. Who's the toughest guy you faced? And he hesitated for a moment and they went, Jarrad Davis, Florida. He just, I just think his closing speed, the way that he hits, the way that he will burst into the backfield, the way that he can cover, just the way that he will elevate a team. He will play through the pain. His coaches talk about him like he was, long lost son or something like this. There was just so many great things about him that I really struggle to imagine a draft without him being called on the first day. Somebody, and I don't know who, but somebody is going to fall in love with this guy. And it could easily be Arizona at 13. It could easily be Oakland at 24. But I think he's going to go between those 2 picks.
Speaking of places that people could go, let's quickly just go through my mock draft. The last time we did this, I said, Rob, go ahead and roast me. I don't know that much yet. This time around, I feel like I have learned some, and I know more about these guys for sure, and I know what these teams need, and I've thought some more about what would be best for these teams. So I just want to quickly go through the picks, and you can give me your thoughts quickly on any of the names or picks that stand out to you, good or bad. The number 1 pick, we'd note here to talk about Myles Garrett to the Browns. Myles Garrett will be the number 1 pick. If the Browns somehow get a deal that's too good to be true to move down, then maybe that's what they do. But otherwise, Browns, Garrett, number 1. Number 2, 49ers, Malik Hooker. Thoughts being that I like Solomon Thomas there as well. A lot of people have Solomon Thomas going there, but I think with Hooker, you're getting the old Earl Thomas player. You're getting the guy that, becomes John Lynch's safety linchpin, which is going to be, that's where Lynch was. I think that Hooker elevates Jimmy Ward, Jaquiski Tart, Eric Reed, Tremaine Brock, all these guys that they've brought in, I think that Hooker helps elevate them and sets the tone from the back of the defense, because I think secondary, like I said before, is where you build your team. Solomon Thomas, then I have going to the Bears at 3, where Vic Fangio is the defensive coordinator. He's familiar with Stanford because he was the defensive coordinator at Stanford. Solomon Thomas solidifies their front of their defense, and I think that's a huge good pickup for the Bears. I'll just go down to the pick 5. Leonard Fournette to the Jaguars. I think you give Blake Bortles a running back, he'll perform better. The offense will perform better. They don't need defense. They don't need to go defense right now. They need to get a legitimate offense. And then the Titans, with their pick that they got from the Rams, John Ross. This may be the top 5 pick that gets the most controversy, but I think John Ross, one of the most unique athletes to ever come into the league. He ran a 4.22, breaking the combine record, but he did it at 188 pounds. He's not Dree Archer size. He's not Tavon Austin size. 188 pounds, while light for many receivers, is not light, especially when you're running a 4.22. He was productive last year at Washington, 17 touchdowns, 81 catches. He was a big reason why Jake Browning had the season he had. So I think that the Titans, you pair John Ross with Marcus Mariota. You've got this extra pick. Use it to try and get a superstar that you can put on offense, and I think the Titans would not regret that. So my top 5 picks, is there anything that's standing out to you in a good or bad way?
It all makes a lot of sense. It's hard to argue. I mean, I think there's obviously the possibility that different players could go in the different slots, but I think that it would make a great deal of sense for the 49ers to take Malik Hooker number 2 overall, just because they want to play Seattle's defense, and it's very hard to play Seattle's defense without, an Earl Thomas type of player. So Malik Hooker can do that. I think there's, number 2, it could easily be Hooker, it could be Fournette, or it could be Solomon Thomas. I think they're the options. I think Lance Zierlein made a very interesting assertion the other day, or a projection rather than an assertion, but a projection that Carolina, having traded away Coney Ealy and having acquired or swapped picks so that they moved into round 2 again, giving them 2 second-round picks, could be a precursor to Carolina giving that second-round pick to San Francisco to move into the number 2 spot to take Solomon Thomas, who is a very Carolina Panthers type of player. So maybe the Niners will move down, but apart from that, yeah, I mean, in my last mock, I had Fournette, the one that I didn't publish. I thought Fournette might end up going number 2, but considered Malik Hooker there. Had Solomon Thomas in the same place as you. I won't mention what I was going to do at number 4 because I want to keep that as a little surprise for now. But I think John Ross at number 5, I easily think he could go in the top 10. I think that you run a 4-2-2 and you get open the way that he gets open, and teams are going to consider him in the top 10. And if it's not to Tennessee, it could be to the Jets, could be to Carolina, could be to Cincinnati, could be to Buffalo. I think somebody's going to take him quite early. So definitely some potential there for John Ross. That is not if people think, wow, John Ross is very early, nobody else is saying that, there's every chance he's going to go in the top 10.
Moving to the next 5 picks, I got the Jets at 6 picking Jamal Adams, the safety out of LSU. I think that while a lot of people will put a quarterback here, I think at this point you're still making that same sort of quarterback pick, similar to when the Jets took Mark Sanchez 5th overall in 2009, which is saying that, hey, this is the best quarterback in this draft, but he's not good enough to go in the top 3, which I think means something. It might be a very talented draft outside of quarterback. There's a lot of great defensive players in this draft, but I think there's something to be said for why Deshaun Watson and Mitch Trubisky are not being locked into the top 3, which is to say that their flaws should not necessarily warrant a team bypassing a great prospect at another position for a decent one at quarterback. I personally think that Deshaun Watson will be successful in the NFL, but it doesn't mean that I don't necessarily think that other teams will, or that I know enough to really say that with any certainty. So I think that the Jets signing of Josh McCown, while not exciting or precluding them from getting a quarterback of the future in this draft, even at number 6, I think that it's enough to say, look, we're going to go with McCown, Hackenberg, and Petty, and we're going to roll our dice because Todd Bowles can get this safety, Jamal Adams, to put next to Calvin Pryor to really, again, set the tone in the back of the defense. Chargers, Jonathan Allen thought that it's a good value that he's fallen out of the top 5, so they put him next to Joey Bosa, and they say, look at our defensive line. Number 8, Panthers, Marshawn Lattimore. They need, even though they've gotten good production out of their rookies from last year, Daryl Worley and James Bradbury, if you have an opportunity to get a number 1 corner, put Marshawn Lattimore out there. It'll elevate the cornerbacks around him. Number 9, I mentioned it earlier, Garrett Bowles to the Bengals. They lost Andrew Whitworth. Bowles, they're a team that likes to draft offensive linemen early, and this would be a great one for them to get. And then the Bills, Corey Davis. I think that you just look at the depth at wide receiver after Sammy Watkins, and it's abysmal. And Sammy Watkins himself is not the picture of health. So you don't go out there and re-up Tyrod Taylor, bring him back, have LaShawn McCoy, and then say, well, we don't have anyone for you to throw to. So Corey Davis, Western Michigan, number 10. Your thoughts on those 5?
I think that I think that there's some sense there. I think New York could easily end up. Their GM takes best player available, and a lot of teams say they do that, but the Jets have actually done it in the first round, and they will go with whoever's top of their board at that point, I'm sure. And that could easily be one of the 2 safeties. I think Jonathan Allen might slip a little bit just because of the shoulder. If you have got arthritis, it's not a situation that's ever going to get better. It's only ever going to get worse. And I think that teams will be wary of that. Now, if teams are thinking, well, we can get 5 or 6 years out of him before this deteriorates to a point where it's concerning, they might think, well, in a 1 contract situation, we will take 4 or 5 years of Jonathan Allen. But I think there's a chance that he might drop out of the top 10 as a consequence. I kept the Carolina, I'm not sure, because they probably could use an injection of talent at cornerback, but they seem to be sort of the way that they let their top cornerback just walk away in free agency and then try to fit rookies in there. And it almost seems like they feel somewhat like they can just plug people in there, and that's not as important, that maybe they need more value at defensive line and linebacker, and the back end will take care of itself. So philosophically, I'm not sure they're open to the idea of a top 10 cornerback, but who knows? I think Garrett Bowles makes a ton of sense for Cincinnati. They've lost a lot of offensive linemen, and he's a kind of like AFC North player. So I think that pick makes a great deal of sense. It's something that I would, in my next mock draft, I got him in exactly the same spot. I'd got him at number 9 to Cincinnati, because I think that is a really good fit. And as for the Bills, they're a bit of a wild card because their big needs are kind of like safety and maybe cornerback. And yet, they could go in a number of different directions, tight end, quarterback even. But yeah, they do need there's a need at receiver as well. I think that Corey Davis and Mike Williams are a little overrated, really. I think that John Ross is the clear number 1 in this class, and I think that Davis will last probably at least into the 20s, and I think Mike Williams will the 3rd one off the board. So I don't think they're going to go as early as this, but I see a lot of people projecting that. I just think that Corey Davis and Mike Williams are good, but not great. They're not physically amazing. They may well have really good careers, but it'll be dependent on, the kind of offense they go to. And you can't help but like what you see when you watch Corey Davis, but at the same time, I don't see sort of the freakish athleticism and suddenness that you see of sort of the top receivers these days, and he hasn't got the size of a Mike Evans. So I'm not sure he's going to go as early as a lot of people think, and I think that he and Williams will last.
Well, I'll say this about Doug Whaley. He's also the same GM that did trade up for Sammy Watkins when Odell Beckham and Mike Evans would also have been available. So maybe not the best judge of receivers in that regard, would you say?
Possibly so. I think that Doug Whaley might be out of a job soon, though. The reports this week were suggesting that it's just a matter of time until he leaves, that essentially they brought in Sean McDermott to be the head coach. Who's the Panthers defensive coordinator, who's quite a likable guy, but very, very much about business and getting in there and getting the job done and sorting things out. So it would not be a surprise if the Bagulas at Buffalo have been really impressed with Sean McDermott and have decided that the feeling seems to be, or the reports were suggesting, that they have handed power to Sean McDermott, that he's essentially making a lot of the decisions now. That it sounds like McDermott won the argument on the quarterback, for example, on Tyrod Taylor, because he's staying, he's got a new contract, and they seem to have committed to him when it looked at the end of the year like they were going to make a financial decision to move on from him. So they're going to keep Tyrod Taylor. I think that they'll be making moves in this draft that Sean McDermott wants to make. And for that reason, I think that he will look at this and think, okay, if he's got a Ron Rivera type of attitude to defense, then maybe cornerback early is not going to be the thing. But is there a safety there? And if there's not a safety there, maybe another great defensive lineman or a linebacker. So the two players that I was kind of thinking about, especially with Zach Brown having not re-signed in Buffalo, is would they consider Hassan Reddick here? Because they love dynamic linebackers in Carolina. And is Jonathan Allen a player they would consider here? Because they love defensive linemen who can rush the passer. So they were sort of two players I was looking at if they don't want to go. I mean, Sean McDermott doesn't have to have the same idea as Ron Rivera and the GM, Dave Gettleman at Carolina. And he might think we need some talent at cornerback. So they might just take someone like Marshawn Lattimore or Marlon Humphrey or somebody like that. But I do think there's a distinct possibility they will go defense with this pick, and they will look at someone like maybe Reddick or Allen as well as the cornerbacks and the safeties.
Yeah, for sure. The next five were Reuben Foster to the Saints, Deshaun Watson to the Browns, Hassan Reddick to the Cardinals, Garyon Conley to the Eagles, and Jabril Peppers to the Colts. With Foster and Peppers, I just felt like two bad defenses just get really great players at the college level to just inject some talent and sort of like success into those players rather than, the Colts continuously making those mistakes they made with Ryan Grigson by drafting wide receivers or mediocre offensive linemen. And now they just sort of get a good player and sort of figure out the position later on. And Hassan Reddick going number 13 to the Cardinals. Thoughts on those five?
Yeah, the Colts they're in much better hands now. So I think it's entirely possible that they will just take the best defensive player who's there, who can be a cornerstone piece for them, and they should have a great opportunity to do that. The other option for them, I guess, is offensive line. If they wanted to take Forrest Lamp here, maybe somebody like that, that could be an option for them because it seems like he might go in the top 20. Conley makes sense for the Eagles. Reddick makes perfect sense for the Cardinals. As does Foster. Foster could go anywhere from probably like number 9 to Cincinnati to number 17 Washington. I mean, we'll have to see how the character concerns with him maybe influence his stock. And I think there's every chance that Cleveland will consider a quarterback here. I think the quarterbacks could end up being. I know that it's kind of a much maligned quarterback class, but I think it maybe goes one of two ways. I think we could see a lot of them coming off the board quickly, whether Arizona will consider taking one very early. Will Cleveland take one at 12? What are Jacksonville going to do? Because Blake Bortles has not convinced anybody in that program. And from what I understand, there are a few character concerns with Blake Bortles. I cannot imagine, though, the kind of stuff that apparently has happened with Bortles in Jacksonville lasting with Tom Coughlin in charge of the team. Tom Coughlin's going to want the leader of his team to be the quarterback. He's going to want to be able to rely on the quarterback in a way that Eli Manning might have been erratic at times on the field, but he was a safe pair of hands. You never had to worry about Eli Manning. And I think they're going to want somebody who can be that way for the quarterback in Jacksonville. So I think that that's an option for them. The Jets are a team that could take a quarterback. There are one or two other teams that could do that. And it's how the chips are going to fall here. Is Deshaun Watson going to go first? Is Mitch Trubisky going to first? Is Patrick Mahomes going to go first? Where does Deshaun Kaiser fall into this thing? And then you've got all this talk about Davis Webb, potentially going. There was talk recently that I think Davis Webb even mentioned that he's been told by several teams that he's a first round quarterback. And for me, he's no worse than Jared Goff, really. So from the same system. So, there's every chance that could happen, I guess. And, there was even talk that Cleveland might go defense with their first two picks, maybe take Myles Garrett, maybe consider taking someone like Jonathan Allen and saying, okay, we're going to make defensive line a real strength for us. And then looking at someone like Davis Webb at 33, or even trading back into the first round for Davis Webb. So, there's a few things that could happen there, but I think the quarterbacks and where they go are going to be interesting. And if you want a really good player at 26, hope that the quarterbacks go early. And if you want to be able to trade down from 26, if you're a Seahawks fan that wants to see more picks that want to trade down, then hope that they stay on the board, because that will give you a chance to move down with, the likes of Cleveland and Jacksonville and the Jets and teams like that sort of picking early in the second round, maybe wanting to get back into the first round.
Yeah, for sure. I could see it going either way, for sure that there are scenarios in that. But the Arizona, I feel that they will be pushing for winning right now, as opposed to building the future this season. And with the 49ers, just maybe they feel that that Deshaun Watson or the guy is there and they're keeping it, close to the vest as they would. But overall, probably just waiting to see what happens with Kirk Cousins in a year. The next 5 off the board were Mike Williams to the Ravens, Zach Cunningham to the Washington Redskins, Marlon Humphrey to the Titans, Dalvin Cook to the Bucks, which puts him back with Jameis Winston, his Florida State teammate. Dalvin Cook, I believe, improved his 40 time and everything at the pro day, so maybe getting back some of his stock this week. And then maybe a bit of a surprise was Mitch Trubisky going to the Denver Broncos at 20. Yes, they did pick Paxton Lynch a year ago, but it's not like John Elway is going to take his chances with the quarterback position. There wasn't a lot of Lynch, there wasn't a lot that Lynch did last year to push for the job from Trevor Siemian, and a 3-way competition in which they trade Trevor Siemian. Wouldn't surprise me too much. It's a bit of a surprising pick, but if Trubisky were to fall and if they really liked Trubisky, then perhaps that is a way that they would go, though also this is a great trade spot if Trubisky had fallen this far. What are your thoughts?
I can't personally see the Broncos going quarterback just because, there's a reason why they traded up for Paxton Lynch a year ago, and let's not forget that the Cowboys also wanted to trade up for him. And Jerry Jones in the video, I can't remember what the video was, but there was some like footage of him after the trade, or I think maybe did an interview with Peter King or somebody, and they were he was just like so much regret that he hadn't given the Seahawks there to move up and get Paxton Lynch. He was second guessing the heck out of that decision, and obviously really it's worked out okay for them because they took Dak Prescott and he's become the future for them. But they were desperate to get Paxton Lynch for a reason, and Denver did move up to get him. And I think that to give up on him after 1 year and take a quarterback in the top 20 would be borderline sort of, you'd have to start questioning John Elway there, because 2 first-round quarterbacks on the roster and Trevor Siemian, who you have respect for, would seem a bit of overkill. I think that you let the 2 guys compete this year, Siemian and Lynch, and if Tony Romo becomes a free agent, you maybe make a phone call there, but you've still got your 2 younger guys, and I think if you brought in Romo, you probably have to consider trading Siemian. So a lot to go out there. I think that Paxton Lynch will ultimately be the future in Denver. So I don't think that they will draft a quarterback, but I think the other picks make a lot of sense. Dalvin Cook is a guy that could go in the top 20 or could drop out the first round because of character concerns. Either scenario seems likely. Marlon Humphrey, I think, is a good pick for the Titans at 18. Makes a lot of sense. Spoken already about Mike Williams. Wouldn't be surprised if a team in the top 25 likes him, but I do think he's going to fall a bit further than people think. And Zach Cunningham didn't have the blistering 40 time at the combine, but did more than well enough in the agility testing and the explosive drills, and is a really intense player. So it's certainly possible that he could go in the first round. And Washington needs linebacker help, it needs D-line help, and it needs safety help. So they could be a team in the market for a linebacker.
We spoke about Jarrad Davis to the Lions. Then I've got Taco Charlton to the Dolphins. I feel that this is low compared to a lot of mock drafts, though I have heard rumblings on Twitter and around there in the NFL draft world about Charlton perhaps being overrated. Someone's got to fall. So I don't know. There's going to be. This is the whole highlight reel of ESPN's coverage of the draft every year, which is who's left, and who's not going where anyone expected them to go. I'm not saying that it's going to be Taco Charlton or Derek Barnett or whoever is left on the board that you don't think should be left on the board right now, but it's going to be someone. We're not sitting here, making these up, and nobody was sitting there, in 2007. I don't know if this is the only thing I can think of when Brady Quinn was falling out of the top 3, thinking, yeah, well, this is, that we've got to have something to talk about. So it's always the unexpected. I didn't need to talk this long at length about Taco Charlton going 22nd instead of like 12th, but I've got Charlton to the Dolphins, Ramczyk to the Giants, Christian McCaffrey to the Oakland Raiders, and Budda Baker to the Houston Texans. Didn't feel strongly enough for Houston to just take a quarterback there. I still think that they'll find a way to get Tony Romo. I don't think that it's that much. I don't think that you're getting I don't know if you're getting a franchise quarterback or the quarterback that you really need to get at 25 if you're Houston, especially given that they could get so much better somewhere else. And the way they forced Brock Osweiler last year feels similar to forcing some guy that you drafted 25 and say, okay, Pat Mahomes, go start for us. So we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously a Houston quarterback would make a ton of sense, but I'm going in a different direction. Davis, Charlton, Ramczyk, McCaffrey, Baker. What do you think? But also, with Ramczyk and Cam Robinson and Forrest Lamp still on the board there at 23, your thoughts at this point on Ramczyk and his fit for the Seahawks?
Well, I think that somebody's going to take Ramczyk probably in the top 25. I don't know if the Seahawks will be that team because he's a one-year player who, unlike Garrett Bowles, who kind of went through the JUCO route and turned his life around and went through a very Seahawky type of backstory. Ryan Ramczyk basically decided, not that bothered, not going to play the game, and then went away and then came back and decided he didn't want to play it again. And then he was late to the party, ended up starting later in his career in Wisconsin, had 1 year, is now declared for the draft. My concern with him would be, is this a guy who's going to be invested in a 10-year NFL career? Or is this a guy that has seen an opportunity, has quite rightly taken it, and is going to get paid a lot of money now, but does he see himself as does he want it badly enough? And he's a very quiet guy, very softly spoken individual. Is he the type of player that's going to really want to get at this? So, and he certainly doesn't play with the same kind of edge that Garrett Bowles plays. So, and he's got this torn rotator cuff, so you don't know how truly athletic he is as well. I think there are just too many question marks there. Now, because of the demand for offensive linemen, there's certainly a possibility that he could go to Denver, for example, who have kind of got a hole at left tackle since Russell Okung left. Miami might consider him, New York might consider him, Houston might consider him, and then there's the Seahawks. I think you've probably got it right. I think New York at 23 could be an option for them. Taco Charlton would be, make a lot of sense for Miami. Christian McCaffrey, because the Raiders don't really have a legitimate option at running back, and McCaffrey seems to be firmly in the first round conversation at this point. And then Budda Baker, I think, he could certainly go at 25. Certainly makes a lot of sense. They could go in a number of different directions. Quarterback seems like one. Even if they get Tony Romo, maybe take one and develop them. Houston seem to have been scrambling around, turning over every rock, looking for a quarterback. So it could be that they wait, or they've got a guy in mind for round 2 or round 3. So, but if they go with a different position, I think that offensive line or safety seem to be a safe bet for Houston there. And I think Budda Baker's destined to go in the first round. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and if I could just, reiterate, we're coming to the time when Christian McCaffrey is an NFL player, and we've had this podcast for, I think, 3 years, 2 to 3 years, but we've talked a lot about Christian McCaffrey. Just to wrap it up, this guy had 5,128 yards from scrimmage in essentially 2 seasons with Stanford, playing in the Pac-12, 31 total touchdowns, a two-way threat, in terms of a dual threat, not a two-way threat. He returned kicks in 2015 and had a kickoff return touchdown, a punt return touchdown. Consistently in the Heisman voting, he was 2nd in 2015, 9th in 2016. Just an incredible talent, but at 6 foot, 200 pounds, his combine numbers were good, but I think the white thing really throws people off. Being a white running back really throws people off. And the fact that he's, not just a white running back, but he's not Mike Allstott. He's not Peyton, what's his face. He's his own player, and he's such an interesting two-way dual threat and stuff like that. For him, if he goes to the Raiders or anything like that, he's got an opportunity to be on the top offense, to be there next to Derek Carr, and have another option there that could really, result in 50 to 70 catches per season with 1,200 rushing yards. But in general, now that McCaffrey is no longer a college player, we're not talking about him with Stanford anymore. He was one of the most exciting players in college football the last 2 years. Really unique, kind of like on that same Reggie Bush level, I feel like, in terms of, being exciting and elevating his offense to another level. Where are you really set right now with how Christian McCaffrey fits into the NFL?
Well, I think that he's pretty much a player that you could imagine, working in the slot. You could use him as an orthodox running back. You can split him out wide. With the league increasingly becoming about matchups and about finding holes in the defense and looking for ways that you can exploit a weakness. Christian McCaffrey is very much a modern day player. Funny enough, watching him at the combine, the thought did cross my mind that he might just become a full-time slot receiver in the Julian Edelman, Wes Welker type of. There are certain teams in the league, that might not seem like that's all too valuable, but there are certain teams in the league that could turn that player into a 1,500-yard season every year. New England being one of them, evidently. But there are other teams, maybe Detroit could really sort of exploit a player like that with the offense that they have. Maybe even Miami, with the Adam Gase system there. And, there are other teams as well that could really sort of use that kind of player. So whether or not he's a running back or, a do-it-all type of player, plays three ways, running back, receiver, special teams, whether you sort of put him in the slot permanently. I mean, the way that he caught the ball at the combine was just unbelievable. It was just one of the highlights for me of the whole combine was when he went through the catching drills with the running backs. I mean, just you could throw him anything. You throw it hard and behind, he would catch it. Throw him on timing routes, he would catch it. I mean, he was superb in the gauntlet, everything. So I think there's every chance that he could just be a dynamic slot receiver in the next level. But he does run with some suddenness, with some physicality. He's not the biggest back, so you're not going to want him pounding up the middle too much. He's not a run it up the gut type at 200 pounds. But there are going to be certain schemes and certain offenses that can really make the most of him. I know he's been linked with Denver, which would be good for him because of the way it's where his dad played. I could see him in Tampa Bay because they seem to be going heavy on offense at the moment. I think that the Giants might be able to, with the offense that they use, might be able to exploit him a lot. So there's definitely options for him in there. And, it's kind of the same as Jarrad Davis. You kind of imagine, I'm more confident that Davis is going to go in the first round than Christian McCaffrey, but you kind of imagine there's going to be a team at some point that says, let's take a chance on this guy. So it might be later in the first round as opposed to earlier, but I do think there's at least he's going to go in probably the top 40, and there's a decent chance that he will go in the first round.
All right, well, here we are at pick 26. Let's say that I am a soothsayer, or better yet, let's just say that I'm a genius and that I know everything about NFL prospects, draft, college, that I know everything, and I was able to correctly predict the top 25 players off the board, which I don't think is too far-fetched to expect me, Kenneth Arthur, to be able to do that. I'm perfect, and here we are. The Seahawks are on the clock. You've seen who's off the board, Rob. Kevin King is my pick for the Seahawks in this position where I didn't have the option to do any trades. There's a lot of guys on the board that we've talked about at length on this podcast. Is there anybody on the board for the Seahawks that you run up and you draft him and you never think twice because you can't believe he's available? Or is this the position where you look at the board and you say, I like 8 of these guys, let's make a deal?
Well, I guess you could look at it. You can make a case for both. I mean, how much you just have to sort of make a personal impression on this, as the Seahawks will have to. How good do you think Kevin King can be? He's got the everything. The size, the length, the athleticism, the deep speed, the short area quickness, the character, the drive. If you think that he can be even better than Richard Sherman, if you think he can be Richard Sherman, if you think he can just be the level below Richard Sherman, do you really want to risk missing out on him by trading down? So that's one thing you could say. How many players enter the league who are 225 pounds, 6'4", run a 4.40, jump 44 inches in the air and do 11.7 or whatever it was in the broad jump, or 11.9 or whatever he did. There are not many people like Obi Melifonwu on the planet. Do you want to risk missing out on a guy like that who can play cornerback, safety, nickel, be a matchup nightmare on defense? Do you want to pass on the chance to get possibly the most dynamic player in the draft who can play in the slot, provide you with 3 or 4 touchdowns on special teams every year, and maybe play a bit of offense and just sort of fits kind of what you have built this team around? The personality, the dynamism, the speed, the athleticism, the kind of things that you look for. And so do you want to pass on Adoree Jackson? So you can make a case for players like that. And it really comes down to how badly you want them. Because if you trade down, it's unrealistic to think you might miss out on all 3. Let's say that the Seahawks trade from 26 to even 33, which was the projection you were making earlier. Kansas City might look at cornerbacks. Dallas will look at cornerbacks and safeties because they've basically lost their entire secondary this offseason. Green Bay are going to be looking at cornerbacks. Pittsburgh will look at edge rusher and cornerback. Atlanta's probably going to look at edge rusher and O-line. And New Orleans are going to be looking at cornerback and safety. So you have got a list of teams there that are going to be looking at the same players as you. And there is every chance that you might miss out on those 3 players. And if you can live with missing out on those 3 and being at number 33 and having a couple of extra 4th-round picks, then you trade down. So I could say this is the kind of the difficult decision you end up making as a GM. What do? Do you take the risk or not? And you'd have to feel pretty confident that I think at least one of the players you really liked was going to be there at 32. And those are the kind of the 3 names that I would focus on right now. Gary and Conley, maybe another one if you feel you can coach him up. Chidobe Awuzie, if you were really thinking that you want to take a slot corner, then he has to be an option there because he's tough as nails and faster than everybody thought as well. And there are 1 or 2 others too. But, it really comes down to, if you get a chance to draft a special player, do you want to risk missing out on them?
Yeah, it's we'll see what happens. It definitely looks like there's going to be a lot of players that you will want, and a lot of players that when you don't get them for the Seahawks will be disappointing, and in the end the Seahawks will probably pick someone that you didn't even want at all. So 27 the Chiefs, Tre'Davious White. 28 the Cowboys, OJ Howard. Probably another controversial pick, but I had Howard way lower than most people in this draft just because I was going pick by pick, and I never felt the place where I thought that a tight end was more important than the other player that I was selecting for that team, especially given the depth of the tight end class and how much talent there is in the tight end class. I felt a lot of those teams in the top 15 would be targeting a tight end in the 2nd round. So I have OJ Howard to the Cowboys, though they did re-sign, or they extended Jason Witten today for 4 years. Their wide receiver group is good, not great. Their tight end, there could always be another room there for a receiver. They need defense as well. It just happened. Packers, TJ Watt, perfect pick. Steelers, Obi Melifonwu. Falcons, Forrest Lamp. They need another guard there, and he could be a steal there at 31. And the Saints, Takk McKinley, he could have gone way earlier than this, but, here he is at 32 because, the Saints could really go a bunch of different directions, and this is the direction that I had them going in. Some of the guys fell out of the 1st round, but the end of those last few picks, Rob, I'll let you throw in your thoughts, and perhaps you need to roast me on OJ Howard.
Well, the thing about OJ Howard is that Alabama's got something in relation to the Seahawks, and that is that neither team seems to really know how to max out a talented tight end in terms of catching the ball. And OJ Howard, there were loads and loads of games in his college career where you think, and the commentators have been talking about it, like, how are they going to get OJ Howard involved in the game? OJ Howard's been quiet again, and OJ Howard this and OJ Howard that. And they would never seem to make a concerted effort to feature their tight end in the passing game. But then when they would feature him, he would just destroy the game. And, you remember the national championship game, not this year, but the year before. He was pretty much unstoppable and showed what he can do. There are not many players. The thing is, he ran the same. I think he ran the same time as Leonard Fournette in the 40-yard dash, but he's 10 pounds heavier. He is, by all means, a terrific character guy. He is said to be like sort of country strong type of guy, and he's not going to cause any issues. He is going to be a better pass. He's going to be more productive pass catcher at the next level than he ever was at Alabama. And he's also an old school type of player. So if you want to line him up and get him running, run the ball and get him blocking, then he's willing to do that too. And when you consider all of these things, and then you think that Eric Ebron was the number 10 overall pick in a pretty decent draft class a few years ago, it's hard to imagine OJ Howard lasting this late in the draft because he's better than Ebron was when Ebron was at North Carolina. And I think there seems to be a lot of momentum. I know that Tony Pauline always had OJ Howard ranked kind of in the top 15 and was just sort of saying it really comes down to his combine performance, whether or not he's definitely going to go in that range. And then he had a great combine. So I think that there seems to be a momentum towards OJ Howard going in the top 10. And that I would imagine that Tennessee at number 5 could be very, Tennessee, what do they want to do? They want to run exotic smash mouth or whatever they call it. And he's kind of the ideal pick for that because, you put him in there and you're never really showing whether you're going to run or pass the ball because he can help you in both cases. So I think that he'd be a really smart pick for Tennessee, could easily be a pick for the Jets, could be a pick for Cincinnati at number 9 or Buffalo at number 10. So I think that there's enough suitors for OJ Howard in the top 10 for him to go that early. So I think lasting to 28, probably unlikely. The Packers are an interesting one because they, TJ Watt would be a great fit for them because he's from Wisconsin, of course, and, he's got that connection there and is on the record as saying it'd be great to play for Green Bay. The thing about Watt is that he is sensational in terms of agility, explosion. But when you watch him on tape, I think that you have to have some reservations about his ability to get off blocks. And if you want him to be a pass rusher in a 3-4 like Green Bay are running, then I think you kind of want to see more from him in those kind of situations. And I think he's more than capable of getting there. And it's important to remember he's played one full season at linebacker and maybe hasn't learned sort of intricacies of the position. I think there's every chance that TJ Watt's probably going to last into the 40s just because he might not play his best football for a year or two down the line. But I think he's got a lot of potential. He's obviously got a great attitude. He's got the bloodlines. So would it be a surprise if he sneaked into the bottom of the first round? It certainly wouldn't be a surprise. But I think that maybe he just needs a bit too much work for Green Bay to think about him in the first round. Could certainly imagine them doing it, but I think that they need cornerbacks, so they might go there instead. But TJ Watt makes sense. Melifonwu could go anywhere, really. I mean, it wouldn't be surprised if he went from like 17 to Washington, 19 Tampa Bay, 21 Detroit, Seahawks, Raiders, Giants. Teams all look at him as a cornerback. Some teams will look at him as a safety. You can imagine him anywhere. So, hard to argue with any position that he goes in. I think Forrest Lamp's going to go a bit earlier than 31, just because that, again, seems to be where this is all going. He's the most explosive offensive lineman at the combine. I've seen Daniel Jeremiah suggest he's going to be a top 20 pick. Tony Pauline saying he's going to go in the 20s this week. And it certainly seems to be going that way. And then Pat McKinley's an interesting one because he too is a guy who could go very early. Wouldn't be surprised if he went like top 20. Wouldn't be surprised if he went, first 15 picks of the second round. Incredibly raw, incredibly unrefined, but tenacious, quick, athletic, major potential, plays at a premium position as a pass rusher. So could definitely see him going at 32. No issues with that.
All right. Well, I could definitely see this podcast ending right about now. It's been another good-sized episode coming in hot at about 90 minutes. So we've gone through my mock draft. Rob is, preparing his next mock draft once it's ready for all the final touches to be the next debut, giving some more time to breathe from his last mock draft. Rob, before we wrap it up, it's time for Rob's final thoughts. So we've talked a lot about the draft. We've talked a lot about pro days. We've talked a lot about the Seahawks and their offensive line. There's a lot of people on Twitter. I feel like they're roasting John Schneider recently and not enjoying the work of John Schneider, which is interesting. But we are definitely finished up with the show. So it's Rob's final thoughts. Hit me, Rob.
Well, just to say that the pro days have provided a lot of nice information, but the thing that to keep an eye out if you're a Seahawks fan right now are the players. You're going to start to see names linked on Twitter, and I'm sure that Kenny will keep across this, and I'm sure that we'll try and get the information on Seahawks draft blog as well. Players it will be confirmed that they're going to visit Seattle. They're going to go to the VMAC. They're going to have a workout. These are the players to keep an eye on, because if you run through the list of players that have visited the Seahawks over the years, a lot of them have been drafted by Seattle. And it doesn't necessarily mean number 26, but they like to bring players in, have them around the facility, work them out, do little tests. And it might be that it's a guy like George Fant, for example, I think they did this with, and one or two others that they drafted later on in the draft. And it's kind of like the top athletes, they get them in, and these are names to keep an eye on in the third day. And a lot of people often say on the blog, give me some day 3 options for the Seahawks. Give me some undrafted free agent options that might come in and compete. And I always just say, look at the list of guys that have visited the VMAC, because the best athletes that are on the VMAC that have been projected as undrafted free agents or 6-7 rounders are the guys they're going to look at. They believe in their coach's ability. They believe that they can get a guy with a great physical profile, that they can coach them up and make them great. Doesn't always happen, of course, but that is their sort of thought process. So start keeping an eye on that. Who's going to be visiting the Seahawks over the next 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the draft? Who's going to be visiting with them in April? Who are they looking at? That is I think the best thing you can do over the next couple of weeks if you want to get an angle on not only the types of players that the Seahawks are looking for, but who they might be thinking about drafting as early as round 2, round 3. They've got 3 third-round picks, so who are they going to be looking in that kind of range? And of course, the sort of the day 3, later round, undrafted guys, priority free agents, stuff like that. The list of the VMAC visitors is always very, very important. So keep an eye out for that.
Bada bing, bada boom. That's it for this week's 3000 NFL mock draft. I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the next 4 weeks, but after that, the draft will be happening, and we can get some more new players into the league and Seahawks to talk about and whatnot and wherewithal. That's it. But follow Rob on Twitter at Rob Staten, Field Goals at Field Goals, or at Kenneth Arthur S if you feel so inclined. And you can go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com for all the good draft coverage, as well as FieldGoals.com. We'll be ramping up our draft coverage over the next 4 weeks to be certain. And that's it. This has been this edition of 3000 NFL Mock Draft, but come back next week for a brand new draft.